And just like that, the streak is over, thanks to none other than the smooth operator.
Long live Supermax, long live Red Bull's dominance, but they have finally been eclipsed by the Spaniard, Mr. Ferrari at this point. Take that, Charles Leclerc, Mr. Carlos Sainz Jr.
A little fun fact for you. In 2002, Michael Schumacher went the entire F1 season getting a podium in every single race, if not winning it. Just throwing that out there, not trying to throw any slack, but
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
14 wins in a row, but not 15. The Singapore Grand Prix has concluded in 2023, and we have a new front runner. I mean, looking at the standings, it's kind of hard to say that because obviously Verstappen's still running away with the season, but this is the Turn 1 recap of the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix. We're your hosts, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, let's go through some of our weekend observations before we dive into what happened in the race.
For starters, Williams got a new livery, and I think it looks sick.
It's like a throwback.
Cool. It's awesome. That powdered blue, it's great. All right, let's talk about a little bit of the practice sessions. FP1, our trusted lizard made his way back to the track. Max Verstappen sees the lizard again, and his radio comes on and goes, "Maybe Godzilla had a kid." That was GP's reaction to Max. I thought that was awesome. It was a little throwback to last season. If anybody was watching the practice sessions when Max Verstappen almost hit a lizard at the same spot in Singapore.
Side note, when they're going 200 miles an hour, how are they seeing lizards?
How are they watching the TVs on the side of the track? I mean, how do they do any of this? You tell me. FP2, Ferrari's still looking on top. I mean, they were on top in FP1 and now they're still on top FP2. Red Bulls are not looking good. This is where we start to notice a couple problems. Maybe they won't be able to fix them in time. We'll see. FP3, Red Bull struggling immensely. They are not able to bring this car to where it needs to be for the specs of the race. It's showing they're going way behind the Ferraris, way behind Mercedes, and Carlos Sainz tops the chart. There's a little foreshadow for you.
Just a little bit of a foreshadow, huh?
Qualifying in Q1, Lance Stroll slaps the wall in a horrible crash. First of all, if they didn't have all the Hans devices and all the stuff that's behind their neck and everything holding him in place, I think that would have been a lot more dangerous than what it really was. It looked bad, but he was obviously completely okay, and we're happy for that. He did not partake in the race this weekend, but that's because with the upcoming week being another race, they just wanted to make sure that he was good to go, so they just sat him for the race.
You know what they called that back in our day? Called being a wimp. Get out there and race like a man.
Why don't you slap a wall at 180 miles an hour?
No, I'm a wimp.
Q2, Max and Perez are out. And not only are they out, they get beaten by Liam Lawson, who takes that last and final 10th spot. Albon was also out. This is less tragic than both of the Red Bulls being out, but I wanted to throw that out there because we've been giving Albon a lot of praise, and he's been doing great things with Williams.
I don't know if we're going to touch on those two guys much in the race, so we can quick hit them here. I think we've made the case that Albon has made a case for a better driving seat, and I think we've presented that Alpine's probably the most realistic fit, even though we don't like that as the fit.
Unfortunately,
I think Liam Lawson, in his very short sample size, is also making a good case. He's outperformed Yuki. He's outperformed Daniel Ricciardo and Nick DeVries in a pretty trash car.
Yeah, and that's also a foreshadow for what's to come in this race as we see Liam Lawson getting up there in the points yet again. I mean, that was great performance by him.
Yep.
Q3, both Haas's are And I had to put that in there because you know about my Haas delirious syndrome. Science tops the charts, takes number one again. Like I said, Liam Lawson makes it to the top 10, and the top three were separated by less than a tenth, which I thought was insane. Top three being Carlos, George, and then Charles.
We'll see as we get towards the end of the race recap itself that there is a pretty tight performance battle between the Ferraris, the Mercedes, and the McLaren squads. They're starting to figure each other out, and they are pretty close in terms of race pace.
It's great racing between the three. Thomas, did you have any other thoughts before we dive into turn one?
So before we get into this actual race, they mentioned I like the announcers' notes before every race, and they've been doing Singapore since the late aughts, but there was a gap for a couple years. There's been a safety car every single year at Singapore.
I did not know that.
Now, to me, that says that's a problem if there's been one every single year. And so to mitigate that problem, they got rid of that 4-turn chicane on the back half of the track. They turned it into a straightaway in another DRS zone. That is where they said approximately 25 to 33% of the incidents occurred. So that's gone. There's always a one-stop strategy in Singapore, but again, with the safety car caveat, that quickly devolves into being 2, 3, 4 stops because you just have no idea. So one stop kind of, but not really. And I think that's kind of it. I took the notes on obviously Stroll not being in the race. It was weird only having 19 cars on the grid. We had that last week with Yuki being out in the formation lap, but it's been a while since we've seen a driver just straight up not start a race.
Yeah.
So, but with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the race start in turn one.
Turn one breakdown. So 5 lights, they go out. Sainz and Leclerc get a great getaway. Leclerc is going to pass Russell, take that second spot, but Hamilton is going to go late on the brakes on the outside of turn one. So much so that Russell's going to push him off. He's going to take that runoff area, passing Norris and Russell. So now Hamilton's going to take that third spot. Alonso also, first of all, let me stop. Any car that was on the outside of turn one got late braking and a position advantage. So just be wary of that as I say multiple people had late brakes. Alonso late on the brakes on the outside. He's going to swing ahead. Ocon swings to the outside of turn 3, which is going to give him a position over Magnussen. Magnussen drops down 2 positions, slowed by traffic. Hulkenberg's going to retain his position. Lawson had a bad start, which is going to allow Max and Gasly to swiftly go right past him. Tsunoda goes late on the brakes on the outside, passing Albon and Perez. Piastri late on the brakes on the outside, passing Bottas and Albon. Sargent late on the brakes, moves to the outside of turn 1. He's going to get past Bottas as well, leaving Bottas to drop all the way down to 18th with Zhou coming out of the pit. So he's going to bring up the end at 19th.
It was a pretty good race start. I mean, you had the key moves by Leclerc. You had Magnussen kind of getting passed up, which we've seen that from the Haas's before, right? They can start high and then they drop back. Luckily, as you can see on the results on Jeremiah's side of the screen, that he was able to hold on to a point spot, but that's where the Haas just isn't as competitive as it might be in a qualifying session. And then, of course, you had the Hamilton and Russell and Norris fun where that's now 2 races in a row where Hamilton really pushes the bounds of going off track and seeing what he can get away with.
Yeah, here's where it gets a little weird, because if we're going to continue from that spot, they made Hamilton give back the position to Russell. I understand that one. He wasn't ahead of Russell. Russell pushed him off. Then he got the position advantage. But giving it back to Norris, I don't think I agreed with that one. Norris's argument was the fact that he knew he was going to just send it down the runoff. So he was purposely later on the brakes to where he couldn't make that turn. And of course he got the position on Lando early, but I don't think that was the case. He braked just enough to where he had enough slowed momentum to go through that turn without needing to do the runoff. And I guess you can say George pushed him off. That's debatable too. It seemed like there was plenty of room, but I feel like he had that Lando position way before he even tried to do the runoff.
Kind of to wrap up where turn 1 settled, because it actually took a long time for the events of turn 1 to unfold. I have in my notes that it took 5 laps for the events in turn 1 to fully play out. And here's what I mean by that. So at the end of lap 1, Yuki Tsunoda, he retires. He's got the puncture that came out of some of the on-track battling that occurred earlier on. Lap 3 rolls around and you have Lando complaining to his team and engineers about Hamilton. They're like, yeah, we see it. We're talking to him. You also have on lap 3, Mr. Max Verstappen, Super Max himself, sandwiched between the Haas cars from early moves that he made in the first 2 laps. That lingers for a long time. And then finally, lap 5 is where things kind of get sorted out because Hamilton finally lets Norris through. And from what I could gauge from what the commentators were saying, it wasn't an official direction by the stewards that Hamilton had to let Norris through. It was more like a, hey, you should probably do this because it's going to be a while before we get to it. And we might still tell you to do it.
I think Mercedes was just trying to avoid a 5-second penalty that was unnecessary by Lewis, and well made, because at the end of the race, that definitely mattered. As far as Max Verstappen getting sandwiched between the Haas's, I saw this coming just because the Haas that he was behind was Kevin Magnussen. And what do we know about Kevin Magnussen more than anything else?
What do we know about Kevin Magnussen?
He's an aggressive defender, so much so that he has no problem taking you and him out of the race if that's how it goes. So the fact that Max was sitting here, if you watch that, I mean, Max was right on his gearbox through every single turn, but every time that it looked like he was going to make a move, boom, the door gets slammed in front of him. And I think that's just a testament to Kevin Magnussen, to which I think if he was in a faster car, he wouldn't have even had to do that. But the fact that he can do that should say something to some of these top teams, my personal opinion.
He has to be an aggressive defender, because you'll hear oftentimes when someone refers to making their car wide, it's covering more track off, right? So you don't have somebody coming up behind you and getting an overtake on you. You heard that towards the end of the race with Carlos Sainz having to make his Ferrari wider. When you're in a Haas and you're in the top 5 or 10, you're in a rough spot.
Yeah.
Because that car is not supposed to be in the top 5 or top 10.
No.
So like Jeremiah mentioned, you are having to push it because you're either going to lose your positions and you're going to be out of the points, at which point it doesn't matter, or you aggressively battle and one of you gets kicked out of the race, which is always a possibility. Okay, what I want to do now is I want to get into some of the biggest moments of the race. These are our 5 key things, but we can go back and touch on things that happened in more of a lap by lap form if we need to, if they come from these. So what I want to start with is from turn 1. I mentioned it already. Leclerc getting past Russell off the line was huge. It positioned the Ferraris very well for a long-term strategy, a 50-plus lap strategy, until things kind of devolved towards the end when there were some safety cars and some tire management things. But Ferrari getting away clean and having their drivers in the top 2 or 3, that really helps them when it comes to strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Because if there's been any team that struggled with strategy, it's been Ferrari.
Yeah, if we know anything about Ferrari from 2022, it's that strategy is not their strong suit.
One of the other notes that I kind of pulled from this is that, you know, we look at street circuits versus kind of the wide open circuits. And I felt like this year in Singapore, all patterns or history that we have just kind of went out the window. People that were historically good at street circuits, like Sergio, struggled. Top drivers struggled against second drivers on teams. It felt like the playing field was extremely even in this race from almost everybody.
Yeah, that's kind of what you want to see in a race, though, because, I mean, if you're going to see the exact same show every single week, it can start to get monotonous or a little bit boring. So whenever you do get to see some action like this, where you have Carlos Sainz getting way up there, or George Russell's beating Lewis Hamilton and making a play at the top spot, then, you know, stuff like that, that's exciting. Where you see Max Verstappen completely out of the race, that's awesome. Well, not awesome for him, but, you know.
So obviously Haas is not, you know, stealing the show or anything at this point. K-Mag gets a point. Nico drops out. But Haas gets credit for one thing in my book. Haas brought the Red Bull streak to an end. I don't think it was Ferrari. I don't think it was Mercedes. I don't think it was McLaren. Max Verstappen being stuck in between Kevin Magnussen in, was it 7th or 8th, and then Nico in 8th or 9th, and then Verstappen was in the middle for 7 or 8 laps of that race, just butchered Max's strategy. Because every time Max is not started in pole or the top 3, what does he do in the first 10 laps? He gets himself up into position, and then he takes the lead and he runs away with it. He could not do that in this race. And what did Red Bull do? They had their drivers starting on hards. They were running a long-term strategy.
I purposely noted this just because I wanted to see if he was going to be able to pull this off or not. Whenever the race started, I switched to the data screen so that I could watch to see how many seconds he was from the leader, because they only show it when you're watching the actual broadcast for a little bit. Then they switch it to the interval to see how close they are to the car in front. But if you switch to the data screen, you can see how far he is from the leader the entirety of the time. And the entirety of the time that he was stuck behind that Haas, you watch those seconds go from 6, 8, 10, 12. And I was just, oh no.
Yep. Because that Red Bull advantage, it's obviously the Red Bull car is still by far the best on the grid.
Right.
But if you're now 10 laps into a race, that race is way more spread out than it was early on. And like Jeremiah mentioned, that 2-second gap that you had on lap 2 or 3 is now a 12-second gap. And when you're on the hard tires, which are slower tires, boy, that's hard to come back from.
And if we're talking about a race where Max Verstappen is typically winning by 20 seconds, and here he is stuck behind a Haas, and it's getting eaten up to where now he's 12 seconds behind the leader of Carlos Sainz, that's not much of a window, even if he does get past Kevin Magnussen to try and claim the top spot. I mean, that's 8-second gap there, and that's just from when I stopped calculating it. I'm sure that gap got even bigger.
Absolutely. He did eventually get around him towards the end of lap 7, beginning of lap 8. But at that point, like I said, things had kind of spread out. Even the Leclerc Sainz gap at that point was already 3 seconds, and those are just the top 2. So that shows you kind of how far Verstappen and the Haas cars were behind. Okay, next thing that I had, this was, I think, the biggest game changer to the entire race, the lap 21 safety car. Logan Sargent has issues.
And wing rips off.
Yeah, and he's dragging that around the track. Which I'm really surprised that thing didn't fly off. I
don't know how he made it back to the pits.
I have no idea. But they get the safety car, and this is where things kind of devolve, because the Red Bulls, again, were going on the hard tires running long, that they were going to go for a really long strategy. But going back to what those announcers mentioned before the race, there's a safety car every single year, and I guess Red Bull is just banking on it being later, which I guess normally most safety cars are later when you start having tires slide and all that. But they lost all of their advantage because now everybody pits except for them.
Yeah, that's tough, because here's the thing. If he had come out of the pits and he had beaten Carlos Sainz and now Carlos is behind him, he probably could have defended Carlos off for quite a bit of time, slowing everybody down, maybe even causing Carlos to eat up those tires that he just put on, putting it on equal playing ground, because he already had those eaten up hards that he was on. But the fact that Carlos was able to get out in front, I mean, at that point, there wasn't much that he could do. He couldn't even hold back the people behind him as they slowly started passing him one by one.
The other keys to that safety car on lap 21, that is when Norris jumped past Leclerc.
Mm-hmm.
If you're checking out the standings on Jeremiah's screen, you'll see how that played out. And then also, this is where Fernando Alonso's bad day started. Fernando just had a rough go of it, and this was the pit stop where he, I guess, changed his mind a couple times. I'm not entirely sure, but he jumped back and forth across the pit stop curb and got penalized for it.
He came in hot, and so much so that he locked up the front tires and went skidding right past the pits, over the bump and back into the race lane, and then hopped back over the line to get back into the pits, and to which the announcers were like, yeah, that's a definite penalty right there. But this wasn't even the worst of it. Charles Leclerc got held up in the pits. They wanted to release him, but then with the Mercedes double stacking, he wasn't able to get past Lewis Hamilton. There wasn't enough room, so they had to wait until George got out, Lewis came in, then Charles was able to be released. That's got to be some kind of impeding penalty or something. I mean, apparently not, but
that goes back to that. That goes back to that advantage of where your pit is in the row of pit stops, because you have an advantage over when other people are coming in behind you. And so like the winners get like the first box because they don't have to wait on anybody else. They get to go out first. And so I guess that just goes back to the traditions of F1, if you will. That kind of plays into it, but that certainly obviously helped Norris jump Leclerc. And then if you've ever played the F1 video game, Singapore might be the hardest pit box entry because it's around a turn and it's blind.
Yeah.
And like Jeremiah mentioned, if you're going in hot, you got a lot of quick thinking to do, and he didn't really do it quick enough. Okay, next thing, Red Bull's overall strategy. tying back to the lap 21 safety car, if you know there's going to be a safety car in a race or there's a 99% chance of it, I don't know if going hards when everybody else is going softs or mediums at the start of the race is the way to go. I mean, I think you play the field. I think you play that your car is better than everybody else's car. And so you go equal metrics on everything else. If the top 4 runners are on mediums, you go on mediums because your car is going to outperform them. I don't know why they felt the need to go with such an aggressive strategy. The other mistake they made, not pitting under safety car. Cool. You have this idea that your hards are going to go long. They're trash. They were trash after that. They were slowing down. Everybody else was on fresh tires. When something like that happens in a race, you've got to pivot and adapt and go along with the flow. And they should have thrown on another pair. They should have thrown on a pair of mediums, a pair of softs, another pair of hards. I don't know. They were already banking on another safety car, right? By saying we're going to stay out on our hards, they were hoping another safety car would come into play because that's where their advantage would come in. They'd be ahead of everybody. Then they'd get a free pit stop.
Right.
If you're already banking on that, change your tires.
I think the best strategy that I was able to come up with in this is if they had pit and then changed to, if they had it available, I'm not sure what their tire allocation was, but if they had another set of new hards to throw on, I think that would have been the move. And then whenever Mercedes pit to throw on the mediums nearing the end of the race, I think if they had pit from throwing on the mediums or softs, they would have had a better shot at least coming onto the podium. But the whole staying on the hard strategy, and then now they're cold because you're going safety car speed and he's trying to swerve to keep the heat in them, did not work out whatsoever.
No. Okay, and this is the last big one, and I think this will take us through the race. I have what I think is the catalyst for this, but we've got to talk about the fight to the finish, right? Jeremiah watched this race before I did, and he texted me. He's like, "Hey, you watch it yet?" And I was like, "No, I'm about to start it." And he's like, "Best race of the season." I question best race of the season, but I get why, because he had just finished it, and it was an epic fight to the finish.
Yeah, my adrenaline was pumping. I was.
So here's what I think the catalyst is. Lap 43, I believe, 42-ish, Ocon retires on track, and there is a virtual safety car. Why that wasn't a full safety car, I really don't know, because he was really on the track, and there was nowhere.
If I'm not mistaken, wasn't he the one that was pretty much covering the pit exit, like fully?
Yes. And they were like, oh, because Mercedes was going into pit, which I'll get into in a second, but like they're basically coming out right on top of Ocon. Either way, they went virtual. There. They went virtual safety car, which I won't go into all the rules and regulations, but the safety car is a little bit different because everybody bunches up. Under a virtual safety car, there is no bunching up. It's you hold a delta time, and so you kind of maintain race position just at a slower pace. So it changes things, and the teams have to go along with that quickly. The kicker was, and this is what brought Mercedes back into the fight, the top 3 or 4 runners had already passed the pit box when the virtual safety car was initiated. So they had to go around the track again, and that virtual safety car was very, very quick. Now, you did have Mercedes with a almost perfect double stack. I mean, if you're not aware of what a double stack is in F1 terms, it's when you have both drivers pit on the same lap at basically the same time, and you need to time it to have like a 3 or 4 second gap between those cars so that one car comes in, boom, 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 next car comes in, boom, 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 without one of them having to wait. And it was really close. I think it was Hamilton that was behind, right?
Yeah.
He had to wait just a fraction of a second, like just a hesitation.
That was pretty much perfect.
It was pretty much perfect. So that set up our final battle between Sainz, Russell, Norris, Hamilton, and Leclerc. I will say that Leclerc kind of dropped off towards the end.
Yeah.
As he finished 21 seconds off the lead.
Yeah, that was rough. He was fighting with Verstappen at that point.
But it was a great battle for the final 4 spots and then ultimately the final 3 spots.
Yeah, dude, watching these Mercedes, I think when they got out of the pits, they were, I want to say it was around 17 seconds. It could have been way less dramatic, something like 11 seconds, but they were eating that time up, catching up to them lap by lap. It was like a 1.5, 2 second, like per lap thing. So every single time that they would go around was, now they're at 8 seconds. Now they're at 6 seconds. And I was just sitting there looking at the lap counter, looking at the car's position. I was like, there's no way they don't pass them. Mercedes is going to win this race.
And I think that's what George thought. And I think that's what Lewis thought, because Sainz, Norris, and Leclerc did not stop. They were still on their hards. And did Mercedes put on mediums?
Yeah. So Mercedes,
they were the ones that had
mediums.
the set of mediums that they had saved, which I guess other teams didn't have any medium saved. But man, it was I'm trying to go back and look through my laps. It was a 10 lap battle. I mean, so a lot of that was Mercedes kind of climbing back into the fight, but then the last like 4 or 5 laps were just them going in a line around the track. And I have the note on lap 58. So there's 62 laps. On lap 58, the battle for first consists of a 1.7 gap between the top 4.
Well, see, the crazy thing about that is that if you took out Carlos and Lando completely, Mercedes, like both of them, would have finished dramatically ahead of both the Ferrari and the McLaren. But because of the fact that Carlos and Lando started to play this game, this little game of, oh I'm not going to get too far ahead so that you can keep getting DRS, Lando. I don't want you to get sucked in behind all that. And of course, Lando's making his McLaren as wide as humanly possible. Oh, dude, it was so cool to see the ex-teammates from McLaren working together.
And I'll give some props to Lando. Obviously, still not a race winner, but he kept dropping out of DRS zone like as soon as he would be out of the DRS detection range. But by the time he got around to the next one, he climbed his way back into it. And so he was popping DRS off signs almost every single time, which really helped him against Russell and then eventually Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like if Lando kind of had to take his thoughts off of winning this race, because now it was a matter of, okay, we got to stay in this 1-2 position. I'm not going to drop down any further. And to that respect, he did equal his top race finish of all time. What he's finished second, I think 2 or 3 times now. This might be his 3rd or 4th. I could be wrong, but I mean, it's pretty good. And I feel like he could have had a go at Carlos there at the end if the Mercedes weren't rapidly climbing right behind them. So, take that with what you will. I mean,
so as we go into the very last lap, it's the battle for first between Sainz, Norris, Russell, Hamilton. At this point, Leclerc was again way back. Hamilton comes on the radio and says, "Hey, George, George needs to pick up the pace." The team says, "Yeah, we know." I guess George picked up the pace and went straight into a wall.
Dude, I was looking at a meme that was created from this where somebody had put a pin on Google Maps right at that spot in Singapore where that turn is, where that wall was. And he titled it George's Hopes and Dreams. I was like, oh no.
So he was known as Mr. Consistency last year, getting a ton of top 5 finishes. We're not seeing that from him this year. And I think that goes to him trying to be a little more aggressive. Like what he was doing last year wasn't winning races, right? So he's like, okay,
right,
I can finish in the top 5. What do I need to go to that extra step? And it is more of an aggressive driving style. For him to be on relatively new tires and to do what he did means that he was really pushing the limits of himself in that car.
Oh, yeah. When you have a 7-time world champion behind you and he's right up on your gearbox,
telling you to go faster.
Well, he doesn't tell him, if you notice, he doesn't tell him to go faster until they're at probably like the last 2 laps, two or 3 laps, which means that George was pushing full speed at the same pace as the 7-time world champion. So, I mean, he was doing a great job. The Mercedes was quick. They were gaining fast, but man, he slapped that wall.
So, I mean, again, it was a good race by George, but you got to finish that drive. I mean, you were in 3rd. You've got to finish that, dude.
I will say this. When you're chasing somebody in Formula One, typically, I mean, you know this from go-karting, when you're behind somebody, you almost mimic exactly what the car in front of you does. And then whatever mistake they might make, or where you can chop off a 10th of a second, 100th of a second, you kind of make that adjustment behind him.
Yep.
Lando Norris taps this wall before him, right in front of him. And George Russell comes right up behind because he's following Lando right in his shadow, taps the same wall. But the thing is since he's trying to cut off that fraction of a second, he hits it with a little bit more than Lando did, completely breaks the steering, goes straight into the wall, and Lando gets off scot-free.
Singapore and Jeddah, or Saudi Arabia, are 2 of my favorite tracks because when you're looking at they do those cameras that are like really quick cuts because the cars are, zooming around so fast. It looks like those cars are like scraping the barriers. Like they are so close to it, but there is a difference between brushing a barrier and hitting a barrier. And
especially at 180 miles an hour.
And George found that out as, like Jeremiah said, he went maybe a millimeter deeper than Norris did, but that makes all the difference. So your race ends, and it was a great battle to the finish, but you have Carlos Sainz winning his second ever race, which we'll get to in a second. Lando Norris, Hamilton, Leclerc, Verstappen climbing his way up to fifth, Gasly with another okay performance, Oscar Piastri, Sergio Perez, the rookie Liam Lawson, and K-Mag holds on to his single point down in 10th.
All right.
I want to say there seems to be some confusion around Carlos Sainz, and even we were a little bit confused after the race because he won last year at Ferrari,
right,
at Silverstone.
But then he's going on the radio at the end of this race saying that this was his first smooth operation at Ferrari. Now, I don't know if that just means that he's talking about for this year, because that would make sense, but
they kept saying in Ferrari, and people are online were like, this is his first big thing in a Ferrari. And in my head, I'm like, he won last year. He's done it before.
Yeah. I wanted to throw this out there too before we get too far in the after the race effect. Piastri finishes in 7th. Lando Norris finishes in 2nd. I can help explain why this is a little bit more. McLaren brought an upgrade, but they only had the funds to bring the upgrade to one car. So Lando's the only one that got that upgrade. So we see where the McLaren essentially would have ended up if they weren't for that upgrade that Lando got. Okay.
You want to get into a little bit of winners and losers talk?
Sure.
I'm going to kick things off. Just 2 winners for me today. One, a little bit obscure. Williams. What a great livery. Williams does not miss when it comes to how their car looks. Yeah, that powder blue and that orange, like it looked like one of those like 1950s, 1960s F1 car.
It's sick. It reminded me of when the Texas Rangers brought back the powder blue. Oh god, it looks so good.
When I saw it around on the track, I was like, whoa, like that is awesome looking. And their other liveries haven't been bad. Like Tiger Stripes was awesome. Like, don't get me wrong, but this is cool too.
First of all, I had to look up what team that was because I was like, did Alpine bring a new livery? What?
Yeah.
What am I watching F2? What's going on?
I was like, is that Sauber's new look?
Yeah.
But it was fan voted, just from doing some quick Google searches on it, which way to go, fans.
Yeah.
And the fact that it didn't say like Kari McCar car on the side of it or something like that. Second winner, Carlos Sainz. Obviously Charles has a little bit more in terms of like race wins and stuff from his past 2 or 3 seasons, but I can almost definitively say at this point, Carlos is the better driver right now. We've seen it all season.
I'd just like to say I called this from the jump when I put Carlos Sainz finishing over Charles Leclerc in our predictions way back.
Yep. And it makes you wonder if like the past couple seasons when they've had all their strategical errors, if they've been focusing too much on pushing Charles up there when they should have just been letting him battle it out. And when they battle it out, Carlos wins every single time.
He's more consistent. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Makes
right,
better calls. So for my winners, obviously, I'm going to start with Carlos Sainz. We're going to go ahead and give Ferrari the win for this one. Charles finishing in 4th, but mainly Carlos Sainz finishing in 1st. What a great day for him. Lando Norris, I want to put up there as one of my winners just because I was looking at the driver standings after this race, and look who's creeping up on George Russell, who also didn't help his case whatsoever in this race. My other winners, K-Mag, let's go Haas. Gotta throw them up there.
He doesn't crack the top 10 for the year, but crack the top 10 for Singapore.
Right on. He gets the point. My losers, Red Bull. And I didn't think that I would say this all this season. In fact, I think it was the last race where we were saying, I think this is going to be a definite for the winners for the rest of the season. We were wrong. It's the very next race. Neither one of them scrape a podium whatsoever.
I mean, okay, for context, hang on. If any other team moved up from 11th and 13th or wherever they started to where they finished, they would be a winner. It's the fact that they're Red Bull that they are being handicapped.
Yes and no, because 5th and 9th or 5th and 8th isn't really that good. I mean, if Max was able to get up to 3rd and Sergio got up to 5th, then I'd be like, okay, great recovery drive. But he got 5th. That's not impressive.
But they started
whatsoever.
11th and 13th. If any other team went 13 and 11 to 8 and 5,
We've seen Max go from 17th to winning the race before.
yes, our previous information of what they can do is now making them losers.
That's fair. That's fair.
If Alpine did that, they'd be number
I'd
one.
lose my mind.
It's a little unfair.
Yeah, that's fair. For the rest of my losers, I'm going to have to give. I hate to do this. I really hate to do this. And I don't mean this in like the most aggressive way. I mean this very lightly. I'm going to have to make Alex Albon one of my losers.
Aw.
Just because he's been doing so good, cresting that top 10 over and over and over and over. And I was expecting to see it at any moment. But with him getting 11th, he was just not able to get the job done. And that stinks, man.
I've got 2 losers. I'm not going to say Red Bull the team. I will say Red Bull's strategy. I think this was the
Okay.
first time they had poor strategy. And I thought before the race even started that it was a bad strategy. Like, it just didn't make any sense. You know your car is the best. Don't trick it up to try to get an advantage. You don't need it. And then just because I said I would, Aston Martin, they're going to be a loser for the rest of the season. As we mentioned 4 weeks ago, because look at who didn't start the race. Lance Stroll. Why? Because he can't keep his car on the track. Now, Alonso had his day, which we didn't even mention how Alonso's day got worse. I'm sorry, I left you on a cliffhanger on that. Alonso had his 5-second penalty for his first pit stop. His second pit stop, 28.5 seconds stationary.
Yeah, that was rough.
25.8. It was some iteration of those numbers because they couldn't lift up the back of his car.
On top of that, sliding around the track left and right. It's just not a good day for Fernando Alonso. That was hard to watch.
And even if he finished in the points, he's still getting passed by Lewis over on this side of the screen, which finally happened in this race. And Lance Stroll's not getting any points and hasn't gotten any points for a very long time. He's been stuck at that 47 number since like the start of the year. He's going to get passed by Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, that's bad. I was expecting him to at least be competing with the McLaren just because they had such a rough start. But even McLaren has just put 50 points on him at this point. It's just getting rough.
If they add 46 more races to the season, Kevin Magnussen might even pass him. Just racking up 1 point after another.
Yeah. So I'm going to finish off my losers with 2 more.
Okay, you got half the field at this point.
Well, because a lot of them are losers. What can you say? George Russell. I have to call you a loser on this one because, dude,
Yeah.
I understand you were following Lando Norris, but you were going on the radio. You came on the comms like 2 separate times during the race talking about, I want to go for the win. Yeah, you went for the wall. That's what you went for. And now you're out of the race. Didn't even get a finish. No points out of it. My final loser, Yuki Tsunoda. Dude,
Yeah.
from if it's not I didn't start the race, then it's I'm out on the first lap. I mean, I don't know what to do with this guy because we keep hearing tell of his speed, and when he does finish, he gets in the points, which is amazing. But that's if he finishes the race or even starts the race.
Yuki comes and goes in these phases and they don't make any sense. He'll have a year to a couple of weeks stretch where you're like, man, Yuki's the next guy in line. And then you have seasons like this where you're like, they really got to replace him because, I mean, he's still a young driver. He's one of the youngest out there, but it's the same conversation we've had about Zhou Guanyu. You know, it's the same conversation we are having about Alex Albon before this season. Man, this is not the time to stink.
No.
They are actively looking for Sergio Perez's replacement every single day.
And this is now more than ever your chance to get that second Red Bull seat.
Like right now, Liam Lawson would be more in line for it than Yuki Tsunoda.
That's sad.
He came in and performed.
Well, to finish this off, Red Bull has a chance to win the Constructors. Win.
So Red Bull can win the Constructors in Japan, which is this coming weekend. There's 2 caveats, which is they have to outscore Mercedes by 1 point combined, the 2 drivers, and they need to not be outscored by Ferrari by 24 points. The math kind of works out to if both Red Bull drivers finish in the top 5, odds say they should win in Japan. Or if Max wins or Perez wins, the odds are really heavily in their favor.
So assuming that Red Bull will actually get it right during the practice sessions this next weekend coming up, it's safe to say they pretty much are going to lock it in next race.
Yeah, unless if they have a day like today, it's not or a day like in Singapore, it's not a guarantee. But it's, again, the odds say it's pretty good. Max can win in Qatar. He can no longer win in Japan because of this race. But he's got to wait at least 2 more weeks before he can lock things up, which, again, there's a pretty good chance of that.
We talked about this earlier, the ridiculousness of this whole he can win it at this point. For those that don't understand what's going on, Max has to not finish a single race for the rest of the season and Sergio win outright every single race going forward for somebody else to win this driver's championship.
Yeah, Hamilton might have a shot, but I mean, he's 40-something points behind Perez. He might be out of the mix too at this point. The math is kind of hard to do because there's a lot of points left, because there's still 2 or 3 sprint races left.
Oh yeah.
There's the fastest lap point on every race, so there's a lot of variables. You can do the math, and there's websites that have done it, but we can't do the math.
No.
All right, let us know in the comments when you think Max Verstappen's going to clinch the title, and will he race the rest of the season after that, or does he just hang it up and call it quits?
Guys, if you think Valtteri Bottas is going to leave and go to Ferrari next year, replace Charles Leclerc, and win every single race outright with domination like Max had this year, I believe you, and I'm on your side.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.